Okay, check. Testing 1, 2. Sound thingy. So, oh, there it is. Check. Looks like it's working. That's the best I can do there. There's a button I'm supposed to push. Okay. All right. Well, lost my person who takes care of things for me today, at least at the moment, and get this thingy here started. Oh my goodness, I can't. There it goes. Okay. Here we go. Okay, so this week we began with vaYiqra, chapter 25 and verse 17. So as is my custom, I'm going to back up and start with 16 and read you my translation. That's Leviticus, by the way, for those of you who maybe don't know the Hebrew word. My translation of the Hebrew says, at the rate of the maximum number of years, you shall increase the price of it. Now, we're talking about people who lease their land. Remember, it says sell in your English Bibles, but you're not selling anything. You're just leasing it. We are going to get to the point where things are in fact sold, but this is not what this is talking about. We're talking about a lease. Now, the Hebrew word said, literally in English, and to mouth, the mouth, which is an idiom that means at the rate of. So at the rate of, to the mouth, at the rate of the maximum, and they're speaking of the number of years, you shall increase the price of it at the rate of, again, because at the mouth of, the minimum number of years. You shall diminish the price of. For the estimated, of course, we have to know from the previous verses that it's the estimated value of the crops that he will lease to you, right? So we cannot purchase our people's property at a discount, nor can our people raise the price above the value. And we cannot charge for more years than actually leased. So the sages got this very, very wrong. They concluded that no matter when you leased somebody's property, you had to pay the whole 50 years. No, you didn't. You paid for the years that you leased it. So if you're 10 years into, the last Jubilee was 10 years ago, you have to automatically cut 10 years off of the length that the lease can be. It can only be 50 years if you start the day after the Jubilee. And then, it's only according to how long you're going to lease it. Maybe you're only going to lease it for 3 years. Well, that's all you're going to charge. That's all you're going to lease. That's going to be the lease payment. It's going to be for the 3 years, not for everything before or after. We really need to understand that. Okay, so verse 17, very literally, just as literal a translation as I can give you. And not you shall wrong man, peoples he, and reverence you from God, you for I, Yahweh, God you, right? So it's belo tonu, which is, and you shall not wrong. Sorry, I probably did that right into the microphone. That's to act violently. That's to oppress. Um, in some places, they use that for somebody who is wielding a sword, someone who is forcing, in other words, forcing you at the tip of a sword to do something, right? This word is, you should get the idea of violence here. This is, you will not do some kind of violence to somebody. Well, what's the violence? Probably going to tell us. Then it says, ish. So you're either not doing this to a man, or you as a man cannot do that to somebody else. Of course, in Hebrew, it's going to be both. You know, I was going to say something earlier about that other verse. Oh, let's talk about the way Hebrew works. The biblical dialect of Hebrew is different than modern, very different than modern. And one thing that stands out here is that you're setting up this price at the rate of what it's worth, of what the crop is going to be worth at best, not, well, what if we have a bad year? No, God said you had to, okay, if everything goes all perfectly as planned, how much would that be? That's what you charge per year. And then, but it says that you don't do this to your own people, which kind of brings me to where I am right now. Of course, it's using the word you don't do this to your people. And so there are people who say, well, see, the Jews, they can rip off somebody who's not a Jew because it says you don't rip off your own people, right? Yes, it's very apropos to what this very verse. You will not do this violence, tonu. You will not wrong this man et amito, from your people. So that means, hey, we can go out and we can wrong anybody as long as they're not among our people, right? And then you can start narrowing that down. Well, if you're not born and raised in Israel, like me, I'm born and raised in America, I had a rabbi in yeshiva tell me that I was not a real Jew because I wasn't born in Israel. And then there are people that are born in Israel that don't get to be counted as a real Jew because this, that, and that. I mean, you just name up, before you know it, you don't really have a people. It's we four no more. It's the three people who follow my teachings. It's the three people in my family who put up with my teaching or my thoughts or what, you know what I'm talking about. You can just cut your people down to whatever you want it to be, and you can rip off anybody you want to. If it's wrong to rip off your people, this is how biblical Hebrew works. If it's wrong to rip off your people, how much more is it wrong to rip off someone who isn't? That is how biblical Hebrew works. So God does not have to say, don't wrong other humans, because in order to make it very important to send it home, he's going to say, don't do it to your own people. You follow? Because if it's wrong to do it to your own people, it's way more wrong to do it to those who are not. That's how biblical Hebrew worked. I should say works, it still does. Then we have ish et amito. Now, these words together are not exactly an idiom, but it's pretty close. Literally, the words are man, arrow. It's an arrow that's pointing to something. Man, arrow, peoples, or man to his peoples. Just to kind of give you a literal translation of the words. This translation is okay as long as the reader understands that this phrase is utterly limited to the Jewish nation. In other words, a man to another man of his race. Does that sound like the opposite of what I said? No. it has been narrowed down to just our race to show us how important it is that we never rip anyone off. Because again, if it's wrong for the Jew to rip off a Jew, it's even more wrong for a Jew to rip off a non-Jew. Because there are people who looked at this word and said, oh, see, we can rip off anybody we want to as long as they're not a Jew. Anyway, this is vaYiqra, which is literally, and to reverence you. But it's actually, and your reverence. Your reverence. It's from the word that means to tremble. And that's the tremble in fear, sure. Which is why so many places where this word is used, they'll say your fear of God. You're not supposed to be afraid of God. If you're living according to God's law, there's no reason for you to be afraid of God. But the idea of trembling, as in the wedding night of a young couple, the trembling, that's actually the idea we're talking about here when we talk about our reverence to God. It's the idea of being in his presence should make us tremble. That's what we call the fear of God. Unfortunately, that in English, that's just a terrible way to say it. Then our next word, me Elohecha, from God, you. So in English, we say from your God. Your trembling, your reverence actually comes from your God. From your God. It's not to your God, it's from your God. It says, Ki ani Yahweh Elohechem. But you know exactly what that means, for I am Yahweh, your God. Because this is only written to people to whom Yahweh is their God. It's not written to people who are not. Thought I saw a line there. All right, so my translation of this verse, and you shall not take advantage of, you won't wrong somebody, you will not take advantage of an observant Jew against his people. Man to people he. And your reverence is from your God. For I am Yahweh, your God. Your reverence comes from God. Well, how does that work? You're just walking along, you have no reverence to anyone, and God sends down a lightning bolt and shakes you around a little bit, and now you have reverence. Learning the Torah teaches us just how involved God is in our lives when we revolve our lives around our God. God is not a jealous God. He is not a jilted lover. He is a zealous God, which is what the Hebrew word actually means. It doesn't mean jealous. But the word jealous back, between the 1200s on into the 1700s, actually had that meaning of zealousness. But over time, well, by the time you get to the 1500s, it becomes jealous, as in jilted lover. It wasn't like that when that word was not used that way for that reason, except in very specific instances. It had more of the zealous connotation at the time. But over time, since we've gotten so far away from that, now we think of God as petty and jealous. No. He's intimate and zealous. Okay. You shall not take advantage, you shall not wrong an observant Jew against his people, because this is written to observant Jews. This isn't written to anybody else. And your reverence is from God. So the more you know God's law, the more you live out God's law, what does that do? That causes you to get to know him. And getting to know him causes us to tremble with anticipation of him. Now, our next verse here in 18, very literal again. And do them ordinances my, and judgments my, shall keep they, and do them they, and dwell you upon the land to confident. So, va'asitem, and do them. It's from asa. It's properly to labor, to work about anything, to make, to produce, to manufacture, to fabricate, So it's works. Christians are like, what? Yeah, it's what when they're talking about in the New Testament about doing works and stuff like that, and the stuff that the Christians like, oh no, you shouldn't be doing works and blah, blah, blah. That's all legalism and bondage. Well, I've spoken about that nonsense before. But yeah, the works is the things that you do. Now, does that mean you're trying to do works to get into heaven? Well, it didn't say that, did it? It just said then the things that you do and do them. So, and the things that you do, the things that you produce, as in we know them by the fruit of their tree, and we know them by their fruits. We know them by the things that they do. The fruits are what you produce, what you manufacture from the depths of your soul. From the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, there's all kinds of ways to put this. But whatever it is that you do, if everything you do is deceitful and designed to give you some kind of advantage over somebody else and blah, 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 well, you got a kind of a nasty tree there. You got a really nasty fruit hanging from that tree. And probably everybody around you knows that that's the kind of person you are. Now, if they're basing what they know, I'm going to leave that alone. But if, on the other hand, the things that you do are, things that help the widows and the orphans and the poor and the oppressed, that's some pretty good fruit hanging from your tree, right? So the things that you do. Hopefully we're getting that idea. That's the only word I've had so far. I put a lot of information in there. Yeah, so we have that word, and then that's followed by et, which is the arrow. Et has no meaning. It's just a pointer. So it's just going to point at something. Then it says, hukotai. Well, hukot, that's ordinances. Often translated law. Even translated nomos in the New Testament Greek, even though it's really not the right word, not the right Greek word for this idea, but it's so similar to a law that, hard to distinguish, right? But this is that which is established or defined, spoken always of a single law or ordinance. It's even a custom, just the customs that people do as a group of people. Even those customs are hukot is the word they use for those customs. So these are things that are well established. This is not you did something and then a group of lawmakers got together and made that illegal, and now you're subsequently being arrested for something that you did when it wasn't illegal, and now you're in trouble, right? It's not like that. These are things that are established. And so ordinances are really the right word. Law is not, but it works either way if you need it to, I guess. Then it says ve'et, so and then we're going to point to something. Mishpatai, judgments. And the I at the end, my judgments. This is God speaking, so he's saying my judgments. Now, literally, it's judgments, my. We in America, in the West, who speak English, we literally speak our language backwards, because pretty much all of the other languages say it the other way around. So we're the ones that are doing it backwards, not them. So in Hebrew, we would say judgments my, and in English, we say my judgments. But these are used of the act of judging. of the place of judgment. In a forensic sense, it's to plead anyone's cause, like an attorney defending his client. It's, of course, spoken of a judge himself, and in particular, him setting down his, giving his, what's that called? His verdict's not right. When they set the punishment, I can't think of what the word is for that. This would be the word in Hebrew, but I can't think of the English word for it. His judgment I guess that's a good word for that. Because he's giving his, he's saying you're going to be in jail for 20 years or whatever. Now, our next word is tishmeru. Gotta get that thing rolling. Shall keep they. So you're going to keep the ordinances and you're going to keep the judgments. The ordinances, which can be thought of as laws, can be thought of as customs, can be thought of as something that's somewhere between a law and a custom, I guess. I don't know. Covers a pretty wide gamut there. And then here, whatever God has judged, that's what you got to live by. So if God has judged that you, have to wear fringe on your outer garment, well, then you have to live by that. If you don't, well, that's called sin. So you're going to keep these. You're going to guard these things. You're going to watch over these things. So you can see why the Jews of old got so, if you will, legalistic, right? Why they got to the point where mercy had kind of drifted off to the side, and we're doing this exactly by what the word says. We're going to take it all literal, which of course biblical Hebrew was not literal. And by that, I don't mean that, if the Bible says there was this great flood, then what it's talking about is actually not literal. The flood is the washing away of sin. That's the flood. But that does not mean that there wasn't water around the whole ball. It doesn't mean that there was, and it doesn't mean that there wasn't, if you follow what I'm saying. Because you're supposed to get the point behind it. The point is sin is being washed away. That's the point of the flood, what you're supposed to understand from it anyway. Now, whether it was a worldwide flood, that's questionable with a lot. Others are absolutely convinced the science proves that there was a worldwide flood. I don't know. I've never studied that sort of thing, so I couldn't tell you. I can tell you it's more important to understand that flood represented the wiping away of sin and the salvation of those who obeyed God, not just the one who obeyed God, but everybody he loved. God saved them all, or at least gave them all the opportunity to be saved. Because that's kind of a idea that starts from the very beginning of that book and even runs all the way through to the New Testament. It doesn't mean that the way people understand that today is right, because particularly of the New Testament stuff, that the Christians are completely wrong about what that means. But it's about the wiping away of sin, the salvation of those who obey, and the renewal of the covenant between God and his people. That started from the very beginning of the book and goes all the way to the end of the Hebrew Bible, and then continues all the way through the New Testament letters. And since that's all based, that New Testament stuff is based on what the Christians call the Old, you really should learn the Old before you ever get up and tell somebody what the New Testament says. You'd better learn the Old, because you don't know what you're talking about otherwise. And it's not my opinion, that's a fact. Anywho, so we got vaYiqra. That's the things that you do. So we're saying that now it's being said a second time. which is followed by otam, which now that's that et word, but they've added the sound to the end of the word, which means them. So there's an arrow pointing to the word them. Then it says vishavtem. I'm going to tell you who the them are. Those people who are dwelling with you. That doesn't mean people, well, let's say it this way. It covers the people who are dwelling, living in your house. It covers the people who are living, say, on an apartment complex, and the people who live there actually work for you, but you provide a home for them to live in. My uncle actually did that. He built a small apartment complex for the people who worked for him to live in, and then they worked for him and all that kind of stuff. But that was part of the deal, was you got free rent. So that would be people who dwelt among him. Even if that apartment complex had been in the next town over, they still would have been dwelling with him, right? Because he owned the place. So it's people who dwell on your land, maybe live literally on your land, or live literally in some place that you own, or people who live in your city. They're if you live in city A, and all the other people who live in city A dwell among you. If you live in the country A, as in America, it's all the people who live in America. They dwell among you. So it covers a really wide swath here. It's not just limited to your house, is what I'm trying to say. Then we go to the next word, which is all. It's just spelled A-L, not A-L-L. It's not all like we think of. It's the Hebrew word all, which means on, upon. It can mean foundation. Why? Well, because you pour a foundation, you build something upon that foundation. So it's used in some different ways, but usually on or upon is good enough in your translation. Every once in a while, you actually have to put the word foundation, because that's literally how they're using this word. Words are used in a lot of different ways in primitive languages. They had to be, because they didn't have very many words. Okay, then we have ha'aretz. So you have on the land. The land. It's not on the earth. It's on the land. Because this book, the entire book, whether you're talking the Hebrew Bible, or you're talking about that and you're adding the New Testament letters, all of those letters that are now a book are referring to the land of Yisrael. They are not talking about America, north or south. They're not talking about China. They're not talking about anything other than the land of Yisrael. And you got to get this through your head, because the translators often wrote earth when they should not have. Can this word be used of earth? Oh, yeah, it can. But it's very, very limited to that. It almost never talks about the globe. Almost never. And you think that it is, because it would make sense to you, let's say philosophically, that it's the whole earth, and generally it's not. This is a word rarely used for earth. Almost always land, and specifically the land of Yisrael. It says la betach. The lamed, the le sound added to this word, is usually translated as to, as in T-O, from me, T-O, to you. Or word for, F-O-R. This was F-O-R, this was for you, right? But there's certainly more use to the lamed than that. This is saying basically incompetence. If you do these things that God is asking you to do, he's saying, live by my laws throughout this whole land that God had given to his people. You can live there in confidence. All bets are off if you don't, but hey, this is where we are. So my translation, and you will perform my statutes and my judgments you shall keep. You will perform my statutes and my judgments you shall keep. You're going to watch over these judgments. You're going to make sure that justice is the most important thing. And you will perform them. You'll do these things. That's that word do, the works, often translated as the word works. You will do these works. And you will dwell in the land with confidence. You know God is on your side if you obey him. Things will go well for us as long as we live according to the Torah. All bets are off otherwise, but it does not mean that bad stuff's not going to come our way, because it is. God created the heavens and the earth, and he created them perfect. God created humans, and he created them perfect. Everything about what God has done came from utter perfection. God created this planet such that when the cold waters from up north spill down into the south, the hurricanes pick that water up and take it back where it belongs. God built things such that when the forests get too far overgrown, lightning sets it on fire, burns it down, and it replenishes. It keeps constantly replenishing that ground with nutrients and stuff like that. God created it that way on purpose. So when people go around saying, oh, the hurricanes are up, oh my God, shouldn't that tell you that God's plan is working perfectly? Too much cold water going down, so you get more hurricanes taking it back. The planet is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It will fix anything we do wrong to it if, in fact, we're able to do that, which I believe we can. Think about it. If we had this nuclear world war and all those bombs went off, there would be an immense amount of damage done to this planet. But this planet would fix itself because God created it to do so. So all of the things that we think of as horrible and terrible, tornadoes have a reason. They fix imbalances. The planet fixes itself. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. And human beings were created such that we can choose to do right. We can choose to be righteous, just people. And if we do so, the fruits of that righteousness will be seen by others. But if we decide to do otherwise, if we decide that for whatever reason we want to rip people off and steal from people and harm and hurt people, then that fruit will hang from our tree as well. And that's part of perfect creation. And God gave us a law that would show us how to make these things, not just how to make them right, but how to limit the scale of the bad stuff that happens. But we don't follow God's law. And so even when we don't follow our own laws, like what's going on right now with these open borders and these thousands and thousands of rapists and murderers running free in our country, we should not be surprised by the fact that the violent rapes and murders have gone up so dramatically since this happened, because we're not even following our own laws, right? God's law works exactly the same way. So if we live according to God's law, then we keep the bad down. You can't keep it completely away. You can't keep bad things from happening. But you can live there in confidence because you know that the judges are following the law via, through the mindset of justice, and that the people are deterred from doing that which is wrong. God created us to have the capacity to either follow after what's right or follow after what is not. Because in doing so, we have the right to choose. If we didn't have the right to choose, we would just be, whatever that host was in heaven before humans were created. We'd just be more of that. God already had that. He was looking for people who would choose to follow him. And he created us with the capacity to go toward the darkness and the capacity to go toward the light. And that was a perfect creation. So God is not looking for us to change what he did. He is not looking for us to change the way he built this planet, to change the way he built his people. No. He's looking for us to decide to do what's right when those who decide, when they do those things, God told us how to deal with that. He's not, those who are waiting around for him to come back and wipe out somebody or some group of people, we are exactly what we're supposed to be if we follow the God who created us. Then we can live in confidence no matter what happens to us or around us. All right, so our next verse, 19, very literal again. Give the land fruit it, and eat them to fullness, and dwell you to confident upon her. So what, or it, it's the feminine of it. Think about that. God's saying it again. What does that do? He's trying to drive this home. He's trying to make us realize just how important it is that we obey him, that we follow him, that reverence, that trembling, knowing that we're in his presence grows in us. So we have ve na te na. So we would say, and will give. This is natan, which is your word give. It's to cause to receive, to place it in somebody's hand. You can't just say, hey, I'm going to send you $100 and then not send it. That you didn't get anything but words, which mean it's meaningless. But if you say you're going to give me something, I knew this guy, he kept giving me his trash and was proud of himself for doing so and didn't understand why I kept throwing it away. Don't do that. Unless he's a junk dealer and wants your trash, let's not go there. Anyway, but it's to give. It's also to deliver. When you have a prisoner exchange, this word would be used. Because they're giving this prisoner over to the authority of someone else. Maybe the local police arrested you and they're handing you over to the federal police or whatever. The same word would be used because you're being handed over to another authority or another power or something like that. So it's used in a whole lot of ways. Trees give their fruit. An apple tree gives the apples because they grow from that tree. So the word's used in a lot of ways, and you got to always look at what's going on, what's it going to say next. So we know so far that something's going to give something. This is ha'aret. Ooh, the land is going to give. Yeah, the land is going to give somebody something. Going to place it in your hands. Pretty cool. The land's going to do it, right? Pirya. Peri is your word here. So it's going to give it, the land is going to give you fruit. Fruit is going to come from that land, right? Like apples growing on a tree. The fruit is going to come from that land. That can be anything, right? It can be the fruit from trees. It can be the fruit from vines. It can be the whatever. And he's telling you, hey, there's going to be a bunch of, doesn't even have to be fruit. Tomatoes, potatoes, green beans, soybeans, I don't know, whatever else it is, whether it's fruits or vegetables, that's not the point. It's using the word fruit because it's what grows from something, right? An apple tree bears forth the fruit of an apple. What's something that's a vegetable, Donna, that's not considered a fruit? Green beans. The green bean plant bears of green beans, right? So you get the use of the word fruit here. It's not limited to fruit. This is va'achaltem. And you're going to get to eat it. Woohoo! Yeah, you're going to get to eat that fruit. And it says la sava. To satiation. You're going to be full. You're going to be like a satisfied puppy rolling over on your back. And that's a good image for that. Then it said, Vishavtem, and you'll dwell. It's of you dwelling, you living there. La metach, in confidence. This is alecha, upon it, the land. So let's put all this from where are we currently? Verse 19. So let's put the verse 18 and 19 together because that's actually one verse in Hebrew. It's broken up into two in English, but it's actually one verse. So we'll read it all together. I'm backing up to 18, going all the way through 19. And you will perform my statutes and my judgments you shall keep, and you will perform them, and you will dwell in the land with confidence, and the land will give its fruit, and you will eat it to the full, and dwell confidently in it. Speaking of the land. It's not just based on whether you live there or not. It's not just based on you being a good person or not. It's based on whether you perform those statutes and keep those judgments. In other words, obey God's law, his word, and you can dwell confident in your land. All right, we got verse 20 in very literal English. And for you shall say they, what will eat in year the seventh? Behold, not will seed and not will gather crops our. And I've spoken of this twice already in this series. But we have veki, tom, ru, ma, nochal. What are we gonna eat? Oh no! Did you not just hear what God said? If you follow my law, you're gonna eat to the full. And what's the next thing that they're gonna say? What will we eat? Yeah, it struck me funny. Sorry. It says Bashana in the year. Shana is a year. Shana, no. year. Anyway, Bashana ha shevi'it. What will we eat in the seventh year? Then it says hen in Hebrew, which means behold, surely, something like that. Behold's good. Lo ni zera. If we're not allowed to plant seeds, velo, and we're not ne'esof, and we're not allowed to gather crops. This is et, it will gather, et te vuatenu, our crops. We're not allowed to plant any seeds. We're not allowed to gather up any crops. What are we going to eat? Yeah. And so it says, if they, speaking of the children who follow God's law and his ordinances and his, judgment, but this God saying, but and if they say, what will we eat in the seventh year? Because you remember, we're talking about every seventh year. You're not allowed to plant anything. You're not allowed to gather up anything. You're not allowed to eat anything, in spite of the nonsense you hear from the commentators of the Jewish study Bible and the sages and all of that telling you otherwise. If that's true, why did these Hebrew-speaking people say, what are we going to eat? If they actually thought they were allowed to eat that stuff in the seventh year. It's nonsense. They knew, they understood that Hebrew and knew that they were not allowed to eat that. They can't plant it, they can't gather it, they cannot even eat it. And God's pointing it out right here in verse 20. And if they say, or when they say, same word, what will we eat in the seventh year? Behold, we will not sow, neither will we gather our crops. Because you remember, I think it's verse 5, you shall not reap, and your uncut grapes you shall not gather. Verse 6 says, the Shabat of the land will be for your food, which is why they say so. See, there they can eat, because that whole Shabbat thing is for you to eat your food. Verse 11 says, you will neither sow nor reap the unplanted produce, nor gather. In verse 12, you will eat from the produce of the fields. And see there, God's schizophrenic. He's got all kinds of problems here, because in half the verse he's telling you can't eat it, and then the other half he's telling you that you can. No, he wasn't. He was telling you that by not planting, not gathering, not reaping, gathering, not eating of any of that stuff, when it fell back to the ground and rotted into that ground, it would replenish the nourishments in that ground needed for the next 6 years of planting. So yeah, it's for your food. It's for you to eat, just not in that year. And they got that. They thoroughly and completely got that that's what those verses were saying. Because in verse 20, now when they say, what will we eat in the seventh year, because we're not allowed to sow or gather our crops, I hope you're following me. Verses 5 and 11 tell us that we cannot take the food from our fields and vineyards. Verse 6 and 12, or says 6 and 12, seem to say that we eat the food that we cannot take. Now here in verse 20, the Hebrew writing, speaking people who were there understood verse 5, 6, and 11 and 12 to mean that we cannot eat from the fields and of the vines. It does not matter how many translations say we can eat from the field. Unplanted food in the seventh year. Doesn't make any difference how many of them say that. It does not matter how many sages argue that we can eat that food. God is speaking here in verse 20, and he knows exactly what the people are thinking and exactly how they understand what has been said so far. So if God said the people were asking this question, they were doing exactly that. Even if it is only in their minds, because in biblical Hebrew, if you think it, you said it. If you said it, it's because you thought it. It works. Anyway, I don't want to get into how I know that, but that's biblical Hebrew. Thus, my assertion that the wild food is left alone, in other words, is not to be eaten by anyone or anything, is absolutely correct. Further, the reason why the food is not to be eaten is because it will fall to the ground, rot and die, and replenish the soil. All right, we might have enough time to jump into this. The next one, and command me, blessing me to you in year the 6th, and make the crop for 3 the years. Oh, I hope you're catching on to what's being said here. VT, and command me. The root word here is ziva, command. God's saying, I'm going to give a commandment. God's doing that. And if God gives a commandment, what happens? Let there be light. Kaboom. There's lots of light. Let there be whatever. Kaboom. There's lots of whatever, right? And God's saying, I'm going to do this. I'm going to give a command. This is et birchuti. I'm going to put a blessing out there. I know that's hard for you to tell, but that's from the word barach, to bless. So God's going to give a command of a blessing. His command is going to be a blessing. He's going to command a blessing, if you will, right? Lachem, to you. Now, who's the you here? Just because you're a Jew? Nope. Who's the you here? Because you're Christian? Certainly not. Who's the Jew here? Who's the you here? The one who obeys the statutes and keeps the commandments, the judgments. That's the you here. Bashana, so in year shishi, in the 6th year. So he's going to give this command, this blessing command, to those of us who follow what God says in the 6th year. Then it says, ve'asat. You hear asa there? Yeah, something's going to happen. So there's going to be some to labor, to work about, to produce. There's going to be some production here. Something's going to be done here. There's some kind of works that are going to happen here. Oh, my goodness. Et ha-tevuah. The crops. He's going to command a blessing for you to the crops, and make the crops, Li shelosh ha-shanim. He's going to make the land produce 3 years worth of crops in year number 6. So here's my translation. But I will command my blessing for you in the 6th year and cause 3 years worth of crops to grow. God is going to give us 3 years worth of food in the 6th year to cover the loss from not planting. Wouldn't you do that? Wouldn't you not plant if you knew God was going to give you 3 years worth? 3 years worth of food will be given so that the farmers will have enough to eat for the whole 7th year, I should say, and enough to eat until the crops finally come back in the 8th year, right? Because it's going to be late in the year. Even then, there will be leftovers. But if you feed any of your animals from your crops, which these people would have, if you're a good farmer, you will, there will be a triple yield for the animals as well. These are your crops, not just what you eat, what they eat. You have to supplement the food for your animals. Of course, a lot of people don't know that, but if you're a farmer, you should know this. I know this because the Hebrew text says your crops. It does not give a specific crop. It didn't say I'm going to bless your soybean crop, right? It's all of your crops. Nor does it limit nor does it limit the harvest to a single crop, which I kind of just said, right? For those of you who do not know, farmers grow a crop for their family food, but they also grow They also have to grow a crop to feed their animals. Growing crops for the animals is especially important when the farm is small. Animals, depending on their size and number, consume an enormous amount of food. If the farm is small, crops must be grown, reaped, and stored so that the animals will have something to eat in the winter and to make up for the lack of land area, because it takes so many acres to feed a single cow, right? And if you only own 5 acres and you have 12 cows, you're going to have to do something to supplement their food or they're all going to starve to death. That's not, 5 acres is not enough land to feed 12 cows, let alone your family and everybody else. So you have to plant food for those animals. Of course, if you're on 5 acres, you probably shouldn't have 12 cows. I'm just saying. Because how are you going to make money out of that? I don't know. Would depend, I suppose, on maybe the cows are worth so much money you could do that. But anyway. Well, we're going to have to stop here. We'll pick up with verse 22 next week. Shalom, shalom, everybody.
The blessing, vaYiqra. Yavarecha Yahweh v'yish merecha. Ya'er Yahweh panai v'lecha v'hu. Yisa Yahweh panai v'lecha v'yasim lecha shalom. And in English, may Yahweh cause you to lie down so that you may rest. May he touch and caress you. May he prepare what is ahead. May he watch over you. May he keep you from harm. May he cause goodness to grow in you and take away the bad. May he arrange your life and cause you to flourish. May he cheer you up and gladden your heart. May he cause his light to shine through you. May he show you tenderness, favor, and love in his presence. May he show you kindness and be delicate towards you. May he show you his generosity, mercy, compassion, and desire for you as it comes forth from the depths of his soul. May he lift you out of your pit and deliver you from the things that hold you prisoner. May he draw you to his chest and cast his eyes on yours. May he show you his love and desire for you as he cradles you in his arms. May he bear your punishment and pardon you of your sin. May he take you for his bride. May he establish a foundation in you. May he place his name on your heart and mind and make your body his temple. May you be his treasure. May you always be on his mind. May he draw you near and comfort you when you are afraid. May he assure you there is nothing to fear because he is with you. May you and all that concerns you be at peace because he is your friend. Amen.